Okay, our first speaker today is Antonio Paris. And this is his first time to come here. Okay. Now, Antonio has quite a colored background here. It's going to be very interesting. I'll have to read it out of here. He is the founder and director of the Aerial Phenomena. It's his organization. He's a former U.S. Army counterintelligence officer and Department of Counterintelligence of Defense, and Department of Defense counterintelligence special agent. So that's CIA, isn't it? Okay. You made a joke a while ago. People say you're the original Man in Black. Okay. So it ought to be interesting what he has to say. But he was awarded a Bronze Star for combat operations in the Iraqi freedom, the war with Iraq. So he had a Bronze Star there for in combat. Now he works for the science, technology, and engineering firm Science Applications International Corporation, supporting several U.S. government clients in Washington, D.C. And there's a whole lot of here about all your degrees and everything that you've got. And he's a director and founder of the Center of Planetary Science, a science outreach program bringing astronomy, planetary science, and astrophysics into the next generation of space explorers. You've got so many degrees, it would take a while here to go through
You don't have to read them, that's fine.
But
they can look it up.
the main thing is your organization is the Aerial Phenomena, and you've been involved in UFOs for a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he's written several books on the UFO phenomena. I think they're going to be interested, too, that you're former CIA.
I'm not going to be able to answer a lot of questions today, but.
Okay. But I think you're going to be able to tie all of that together
Sure.
with UFO programs. Okay, so Antonio Paris.
Thanks. Oh, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I'm from New York, and I lost my hearing in the war, so I tend to talk loud with or without a mic. Thanks for coming here. I'm very excited to be here. I didn't expect such a big crowd. But I really want to thank the conference organizers and Louis Farish, his trust. Believe it or not, I was one of the recipients of the trust, and I was able to use that award to write the second book. So I used every single penny to the extent to do my research, to travel to Ceti, to travel to NASA, to travel to the dish out in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and just did a lot of interviews, et cetera. So thanks for helping us out. If it wasn't for you, I would not be here today. So today we're going to talk about space science, and the focus is really the subtitle, is Challenges for the Extraterrestrial Hypothesis of UFO Phenomena. I was kind of surprised that I was the first speaker. You know, yes, I'm a scientist, and for the most part, I'm a skeptic, but I don't always toe the skeptic line. I know the phenomena is real. I've seen some strange stuff, but as an investigator, as a trained investigator, you know, I've done a lot of espionage investigations looking for that physical proof beyond a reasonable doubt to put somebody in jail. And also as a scientist, you know, building hypotheses off data, hard data. I look at the UFO phenomena from a different perspective. So the key points for today, if you're going to remember anything for the next 60 minutes, it's just 3 key points. The phenomena is real. It's out there. But for me, it's more than just believing. You know, I don't know how many witnesses I've interviewed, and for the most part, I believe that they saw something. But for me, it's a little more. I'm looking for that physical proof beyond reasonable doubt. What is it that I can take into an academic environment, a court of law, you name it, whatever, and there is no doubt whatsoever that this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence is of extraterrestrial origin? And my personal opinion is that there's some anecdotal evidence out there, but evidence is not the same as proof. So the book is a little skeptical about the phenomena, but it's intentionally written so that all you guys out there can come together and build a better hypothesis, okay, of the UFO phenomena. And at the very least, you know, just sit back, relax, and just listen to these amazing things about the universe, about space, about everything around us, because you only come once. Okay, so why space science? I've done a lot of these conferences, and I always get this, you know, the water cooler talking, all that stuff, and the first thing I always hear is, Antonio, there has to be life out there. And I agree with that, but I think the argument is better if you say there should be life out there. I know the universe is big. I know there's billions or perhaps trillions of stars out there. Some of them have habitable planets. We're learning that now. But it's still speculation at best to say there must be life out there. I like it better if you phrased it, given all the numbers out there and all the equations, the Drake equation, all that, whatever, there should be life out there. That's different than must. So today I am going to give you a small introduction about the universe. You know, I always do these conferences and people don't know, you know, what's light speed, what is interstellar travel, what is an extrasolar planet, what's a red dwarf. All those things, believe it or not, have to do a lot with ufology. Then I'm going to talk about just a few of alleged extraterrestrials. Not all, because if you read all the books out there, there are allegedly hundreds of them, and we're being swamped. I'll talk a little bit about space physiology and gravitational biology and why that's important. And then I'll talk about E.T. Holmes, and I kind of subtitle that Bad Real Estate Property, and we'll talk about that more. The speed of light and why it matters, you know, not only for communications, but for travel. You know, I get all these things, oh, they must travel faster than the speed of light, all that stuff. Possibly, we don't know that. That's still conjecture at best. And then just some challenges and recommendations, you know, for whether you're an investigator, researcher, or ufologist, or just love this kind of stuff. Go out there, do your research. You know, we've got all different broad spectrums of belief in there. We've probably got believers, we've got, you know, skeptics in here, whatever. But I think we could all come together and actually work together to continue this phenomena. Okay, so, you know, I'm a planetary scientist. That's my background. I love astrophysics. I love planetary science. I love lunar geology, all that stuff. And it's important to understand these things. We know the universe is old. It's 13 point something billion years old. And more importantly, what we can see today with the naked eye or with the greatest telescope, it's still the observable universe. After the Big Bang, we know that matter moved at the speed of light, so we really can't see what's at the edge of the universe because it's traveling at the speed of light. So given that the universe is big, the matter that we see today, the stars, everything, it's really confined to a bubble called the observable universe. And we really don't know what's outside of that. So yes, there can be trillions of stars in this bubble, but we'll never see the edge of outside that bubble because it's traveling at the speed of light. And we'll just never see it. People ask me, is space infinite? From what we understand, it's infinite, but the universe itself is not. When I talk about the universe, I say the matter. You know, stellar objects, suns, planets, all that stuff. There's a limited amount of matter out in the universe, and that is what's expanding into space. So space itself is there. It's a vacuum. It's always been there. It's not expanding. It's the universe that's expanding. The leading theory, and I think a couple weeks ago, they actually even came up with more concrete evidence. We know it's expanding because today we see galaxies and everything in the universe is expanding away from us at a certain speed in all different directions. So if we reverse that process, it actually compresses to a time called a singularity. So at least we know at one point in time everything was in one place and now it's expanding away from us. This is also important. There's a lot of people don't understand space. First of all, space it's a vacuum, okay? UFOs don't fly in space. I hate it when people say, look at that UFO, you know, in space. UFOs don't fly in space. There's no air. Things fall in space. If I wanted to go to Mars, I'd have to line it up perfectly, and the spacecraft pretty much, you know, does a little rocket propulsion, to get into some type of elliptical orbit, and this just drops. So the spacecraft is just falling like a baseball to the ground until it reaches Mars. Same thing here on Earth. Everything, the space shuttle, satellites, it's constantly falling around the planet Earth at a constant velocity. So that's a misconception that people say, well, you know, spacecrafts are floating in space, UFOs in space. That's kind of a misconception. It's a vacuum, and you need propulsion systems to maneuver in space. You see this a lot in Hollywood. Rockets exploding, all that stuff in space. Space is a vacuum. The movie Alien, the original one, had it right. No one can hear you scream in space. There's no molecules in space, so your voice cannot travel from one point to another. So it's completely silent in space. Hollywood only adds this for special effects so they can augment the movie experience. So the battleships exploding and laser blasters and all that stuff, it's completely quiet. And if you saw, I think the last Star Trek, about a year ago, they had it right. So when it exploded and the Captain Kirk is flying through space, remember, it was dead silent. So they had it right for the first time. Let's talk a little about stellar evolution, and you'll see why this is important later. You know, in layman's terms, we're looking at how stars are evolving now, and it's pretty much a clump of gas and stellar material. After billions of years and rotation, it becomes hot, it starts to spin, and it becomes a planet or a sun. And it's kind of a cycle of life. Then the sun will die. There's different ways the sun will die, and then stellar material will just, it's a never-ending cycle, and it's going to happen to the sun too. This time scale is important, and you'll see this later on why it's important. So about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was created, it was evolved. About 1 billion years later is when the simple cells began to pop out. Primates, about 60 million years ago. Modern humans, about 200,000 years ago. Advanced humans, only 125 years ago. And we use the word advanced as the first signal, the Marconi signal, which left about 125 years ago. That's when most scientists kind of use that term, modern humans. The first space signal is now in interstellar space. So what's the point of all this? My point is that it took almost all of Earth's history, from creation to just 125 years ago, that we've now become technically an interstellar species. Our first signal's out there. You have to think about this. Well, if there's other planets out there, you know, how long would it have taken for them to also reach the capacity we're at or beyond? This is our beautiful sun. It's a basic G main sequence star. Main sequence means that there's many of these types of suns out there. Also about 4.5 billion years old. This is important. It's full of helium, it's full of hydrogen, but the most important element is beryllium. Beryllium is very important in planetary formations. There's a lot of suns out there and stars out there that lack beryllium, and we as planetary scientists, when we're looking for extrasolar planets, we're looking for at least a 60% ratio of beryllium in that star. If it doesn't meet that criteria, there's probably not enough stellar material in there for an extrasolar planet to evolve. Unfortunately, yes, we will all die. All things die, including the sun. And in a couple of billion years, the sun, like all suns, we're looking at stars now that are swelling up into what we call red giants. And at one point, this red giant will consume the Earth. We will blow up. We will all die. And I'm hoping that in a few billion years, we would have reached the level of interstellar travel where our species could migrate somewhere else. So in about 12 billion years, based on our type of star, it's going to collapse into a planetary nebula. Everything's just going to slowly puff away. And it'll become a white dwarf. A white dwarf is just it's a rock. It's going to be about the size of Earth, very dense. 1 teaspoon of that rock is several thousand tons. And it'll just stay that way forever until it completely dies. It's not going to turn into a black hole. And it's not going to be a supernova, just based on the sequence of the sun. Now we're getting into the fun part. So how many stars are actually out there? In the Milky Way Galaxy alone, about 600 billion stars. That's a lot of stars. Oh my God, Antonio, there has to be life out there. That's what everybody says. In the observable universe, I can't say this, but I know it's septillion. So it's 10 septillion stars out there in the observable universe. And we know as the Kepler mission looks out further and further, that number is continuing to grow. This was about a month ago, so that is a lot of stars just in the observable universe. Andromeda is not the closest galaxy. Everybody always thinks it's Andromeda. It's actually Sagittarius dwarf elliptical galaxy. The reason why Andromeda always gets the fame for being the first one is because it's the first organized galaxy. It's a spiral galaxy. But this cluster, this globular cluster here is about 70,000 light years away. And JD is, or MAC, I just call it MAC JD, is the furthest known galaxy as of a couple of months ago. And look at that, that's 13.3 billion light years away. That's pretty far, that's almost as young as the universe. This is where we run into problems. Just in the Milky Way Galaxy alone, yes, there's a lot of stars, but about 60 to 70% of them are what we call red dwarfs. And those are very, very peculiar type of stars. Oops, I was almost a loss there. Okay, so what's wrong with red dwarfs and why can't we have planets there? And you'll see later, some of these alleged extraterrestrials come from planets that are around red dwarfs. Problem is that you can't really have planets around a red dwarf because the type of the planet that it is, the planet will be tidally locked, almost like the moon, to that star. So that means that first, the part facing the sun will be pretty much boiling point, and the part facing the opposite will be pretty much frozen. That would be pretty tough, at least for what astrobiologists believe, for any type of life to evolve there. There's no ultraviolet light. You know, if we're looking for a life that is similar to ours, you know, we want something that has actually ultraviolet light. Here's some other misconceptions that we don't know about space. Space is very dangerous. It is. People have this vision of, I want to go into space forever. It's beautiful. It's calm. You got 2001 music, all that stuff. But it's not. It's very dangerous. You know, you have a lot of radiation. Just orbits around the Earth, that's kind of safe because we have the magnetosphere to protect astronauts, to protect the satellites, et cetera. But once you leave the magnetosphere, you're leaving that protection zone. So there's a lot of radiation. In fact, I was doing some research recently where the original Apollo astronauts who went to the moon, who started seeing these flashes of lights, and they were calling them bogies, we believe now that that was radiation that was interacting with their eyes, and they were giving these flashes of lights. And they've done some experiments on humans and monkeys, et cetera, and they're seeing the same flashes. So at least there's some research going on what possibly those astronauts are seeing. Gamma ray bursts are very dangerous. There's about one gamma ray burst in the universe every day. Fortunately for us, they're not pointing towards us. If a gamma ray burst was to point towards us, we're done. Forget it, we're fried, we lose the ozone layer, and it's kaput. There's no way surviving that. Black holes, there's a lot of black holes out there, and now there's a prevailing theory that in the center of every single galaxy, there's a black hole. And then we have the meteorites, the asteroids, all this stuff here will make it very difficult for an extraterrestrial civilization to conduct interstellar travel from their planets to here. So they would have to know space science, they would have to overcome all this kind of stuff. Space is huge. Just 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. And I put these numbers out here to kind of give you a good reference of how big space is. Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. It's about 9 light years away. Center of the Milky Way Galaxy is about 28,000 light years away. Andromeda, again, the nearest organized galaxy, is about 2,500,000 light years away. The Perseus cluster is 240 million light years away. And Z8, so another known distant galaxy, it's 13.1 billion light years away. Now, for us as humans, we know we have the Pioneer spacecraft, the Voyager spacecraft. They're just now leaving solar system and going into interstellar space. We used to think that was fast. It's traveling right now, as of yesterday, 39,000 miles per hour. It's now just reaching interstellar space after so many decades. Even at that speed, just to get to the center of our galaxy, it would take 450 million years. That's a lot. I don't know who's want to sign up for that trip. Either way, you know, I can read your minds already. You're speculating, well, they must travel faster than the speed of light or interdimensional. That's a possibility. But I'm trying to bring this to you from a human perspective on how big space is, how difficult it is, how dangerous it is, the enormous distances that one would have to travel. This would have to be generational travel. Even if extraterrestrials exist and they're traveling at the close to the speed of light, it'll still take millions of years to get here. It's hard to wrap around that kind of stuff. So let's wrap this up. It takes billions of years for, at least from what we know as humans, anthropomorphic, biases, is that it takes a long time for a technological, intelligent life to exist. There's a lot of stars out there, but unfortunately, a lot of them are red dwarfs, and life around a red dwarf would be very difficult. Extraterrestrials, if they do exist, and I'm leaning towards there might be one or two out there, they would have to understand the universe, they would have to understand the physics, they would have to understand everything I just talked about. It's not about just getting in a little tin can and saying, okay, we're going over here. And it's important not to speculate how far an alleged extraterrestrial might be advanced, how more technologically advanced they might be compared to us, et cetera. Because really, that's just conjecture at best. We really don't have any, there's anecdotal evidence out there, but we really don't have that physical proof that this is actually occurring. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about a few species out there that I've had the opportunity to investigate, whether it's alleged abduction or your standard UFO case. So the first one is the Greys. We all know the Greys, they're pretty much the prevailing entity here. Allegedly from Zeta Reticuli, which is a binary star system, and linked to many UFO cases, really modern cases right now, but possibly back to the Roswell landings, et cetera. We all know what they look like. I'm not going to read the slide. Big heads, black eyes, et cetera. But it's the humanoid structure that really gets to me, and you'll see why. Most people that I've talked to, researchers during this book, pretty much concluded that the actual origin of the Greys is during the Betty and Barney Hill abduction claim. Yeah, they might have been described a little bit later, but it was during this time that the myth, all these things about the Greys really started to pick up and exploded in these UFO circles. So the Grey phenomena really started allegedly after the Betty Hill abduction case. And this is why ufologists, I don't even consider myself a ufologist, but a lot of them argue that the Grey is a recent phenomena. It's not something that happened hundreds of years ago, et cetera. Might have been other species, but for the Greys, it's kind of a recent phenomena. But that's debatable. After the months and months of research I've done, I found indications of similar entities way before the UFO, phenomena began in the 40s. We can go back to 1891, where a lot of these science fiction writers were depicting what humans would look like in the future. So they had big heads, they were gray, they had black eyes, they were skinny, Orson Welles, you name it. So all these things perhaps has had some influence in the UFO phenomena. The research shows that it's not a recent phenomenon, and that science fiction could have had a huge part in ufology. The Reptilians, that's another alleged species. And they're called reptoids. They look like lizards. They're from the Draco Galaxy, allegedly. And you see these highly reported in conspiracy theories, conspiracy movies. They're working with the government. They're at Dulce base, building all kinds of crazy stuff. They came into the conspiracy circles about 1967. That's the earliest I can kind of find it, and that was out in Arizona. But that also, I found evidence that the reptilians existed way before the UFO phenomena began. Here we have an article from the 1930s where lizard aliens were allegedly in an underground facility in Los Angeles. So that could have been a part where this species began. Or in the 50s and 60s, there was before the UFO circles reported this, lots and lots of comic books and shows about, reptilians. And what I find interesting is that 1967 Star Trek Arena episode aired, and that's where they show the guy Gork, fighting Captain Kirk. And it was a month later that the UFO circles, started reporting the reptilians. Could that have been a coincidence? I don't know, but as an investigator, I look at these two things. That is a possibility. And then the conspiracies really only began in the 80s, that they're working with the governments, and that was really when the 80s. That show V aired. So, did the show V have any influence in conspiracy circles and the phenomena regarding the reptilians? The Nordics. Every time I look at this picture, I think of the guy from the butter. I wish I had, I can't believe it's not butter. But, but the Nordics, I look at the Nordics, I see a human being, and we'll talk about that later. But, they have the Euro look. This is what the conspiracy circles and UFO circles call the contactees. So they're humanoid in physical attributes. The first, Billy Meyer, all these guys allegedly said that these guys were from Venus. I think looking at the properties of Venus, that's probably not a possibility. Then they're from the Pleiades star cluster. There's not really a lot you can find on the internet or research or interviews I've done, but I did find that there's been a lot of hoaxes regarding these Nordics, and Billy Meyer himself was he had to eat this up. He allegedly said that these two were from, what were their names? Nara and Asket were Nordics from a different star system, but we know that it was a hoax. And coincidentally, after this hoax came out, the Nordics kind of died. There was really not much reporting, and then the Greys came back up. So, let's see what happens in the future. Same thing as the Syrians. There's not a whole lot about them, except we know that they're allegedly from the close binary star system Sirius. They're here to help us, kind of like the government says. And they, some people report that they allegedly seeded us with their DNA, and they were also famous in the 60s and 70s. You see this a lot in metaphysics, astral projection, all that stuff. It's kind of pseudoscience. It's entertaining and I like it. I love to read all these books about metaphysics, but you see these a lot in there. Also, there's your DNA. And there's also, I've sat down with some people, they strongly believe that they were picked for Syrian human DNA breeding. And I've sat down with people and interviewed them, and they'll tell me, I've got Syrian blood, there's no doubt about it. So these people, I don't know, they believe it, they believe it. Here, as a scientist, is where I come in and I look at these extraterrestrials, but I look at us itself. And I say to myself, you know what? Aliens are too humanoid to be a credible representation of extraterrestrials. They've got 2 arms, they've got 2 legs, they've got a head, they've got 2 eyes, they've got 10 fingers. They look like us. And I can debate that. As a scientist, that would require similar gravitational, geological, evolutionary processes on their home planets as Earth. And that is 1 in a trillion. But what if they looked like this? These are actual pictures from NASA of what potential extraterrestrials look like. Look at this ugly thing. I don't even know what that is, but I would probably get a heart attack if I saw something like this. Or something, they believe that some planets, that their atmospheres are mostly water. It could be like this, they look like kind of squids or something. Or these green blobs of plants floating up and down. That's a possibility rather than the humanoid structure. So it's the study I've done for this book, and I've talked to astrobiologists, I've talked to anthropologists, all these people that, evolutionary scientists, and their conclusion is that the humanoid structure, everybody right here, was based off the evolutionary processes influenced by gravity. That's why we have 2 arms, we have eyes in the front because we're preys, etc., legs for walking. etc. So given that, it will require very similar evolutionary processes on Zeta Reticuli, etc., for these extraterrestrials to look like us. It's a possibility. I'm not trying to debunk it, but that is a possibility. On Earth, we have a very unique gravitational pull, and it's been like that for a millennia. It's shaped everything about us, our lungs, how we breathe oxygen. That's why we have difficulties breathing on mountains, etc. That's why we can't breathe on the water. Everything balanced. The way I walk, the way I talk, the way I move my arms, the way I jump, it's all based on the gravity of our planet. So for extraterrestrials to pop open their hatch and walk around and do all this kind of stuff, it's hard to swallow that. It's not an impossibility, but from my perspective, impossible. So when you see comic books, when you see movies, when you see all these things, they're really biases. They're based on what we perceive as what extraterrestrials would look like. We want them to look like us. We want them to interact. We want them to speak English. These guys allegedly speak English, from what I understand. They don't speak Chinese. They don't speak, Spanish. They're always speaking English. So that's interesting in itself. I'm not saying it's not a possibility. They could be out there, but from my perspective, it's almost implausible. Space physiology is a huge paper. I wrote a paper for the White House a while back for an interstellar trip to Mars. And my part of the project was space physiology. What will be the difficulties for astronauts upon arriving on the planet? And this is called space physiology. There will be massive muscle and bone loss because of zero gravity. Once we leave that protective phase of the magnetosphere, we'd be exposed to a lot of radiation that can kill us, cancer. And a lot of psychological and sociological deterioration. I did some research on scientists out in the Arctic in isolation, submariners in isolation for this topic here. And there's a lot of deterioration, believe it or not. Whether that's why at NASA they have to pair these groups up, for specific, reasons. So, a trip to Mars maybe 6 months to a year. Jupiter, 2 years. Milky Way Galaxy, we'll never get there. It'll be generations. So, space psychology is a very growing topic now in NASA. Okay, so I'm looking at all these reports of aliens coming out, walking around, shaking hands, or abducting. So we have to conclude, at least deduce, that they are a biological entity, right? There's even reports of some getting shot, there's blood, whatever. So they are a biological entity. However, if they're coming from space, if they've been in space for a while, you would see different types of physiological aspects of them were in space. And we don't see that a lot. I don't see that in reports. I mean, we've seen the astronauts in the International Space Station. When those guys land, they can't walk. They're pulled away in wheelchairs and crutches, and that's because they have not used their legs in years, up to a year and a half. You can't walk, I'm sorry. And even spending 2 weeks in space, in the space station, you'll see the astronauts come out and holding on, and they're kind of being slowly walked. That's called post-flight orthostatic intolerance, because you have not used your muscles, you have not used your legs, there's no posturite standing, your muscles kind of weaken. There's also, just after a week in space, you come back, severe headaches, you can't talk, you're mumbling. So imagine going on an interstellar trip for just a couple of hundred years or thousands of years. You just don't show up and say, hey, I'm here, and start walking around and start kidnapping abductees. But who knows? People tell me, oh, they've been here, or they're just in orbit, or they're in the lakes or something. That's a possibility, but there's a lot of reports out there that, oh, we just arrived from Zeta Reticuli, and that's kind of an impossibility. Interstellar travel, it's not easy. If extraterrestrials exist, I don't know how they're getting here, and I don't think anybody in here can tell me how they're getting here. But even traveling at close to the speed of light, let's say 99.9999, it still takes thousands and millions of years to travel. Come on, that's a long road trip. it would probably be generational. I would be willing to accept the hypothesis that an extraterrestrial left a couple of million years ago, and those who arrived are generations, thousands of generations that who finally arrived here. I packed a bag with a lot of snacks just for a one-day trip to get here. Imagine packing for millions of years. Man, that is a lot of food and water. Imagine the kids going crazy, are we there yet, etc. Here's the important part. I mentioned in the beginning, that's why I always like to introduce the universe and space. The universe and everything is expanding. Sirius, Zeta Reticuli, etc. They're all moving away from us. So let's say I wanted to plan a trip from here to Texas. Okay, I need 500 gallons of fuel, done. And then I show up, Texas moved. Holy cow, I'm out of gas. So you have to plan for that too. Planets are moving, stars are moving away from us. So, thinking about interstellar travel, you have to plan for that extra mileage. And same thing with communications. Just sending a signal to Jupiter takes, I think 18 hours. So a return response, that's 36 hours. If I wanted to send a signal to, let's say, Sirius, 8.7 light years away, it'll be 9, that's the speed of light. It'll be 9 years if I send a signal, and then to get a response, that's another 9 years. That's 18 years. So for me to say, yeah, Roger, I'm okay, I'd have to wait 18 years to get the response. Roger, you got your response. Now think millions of years. That would be very difficult. So for me, an interstellar trip, will be a one-way trip. There's no return. Communications at some point would cease. Communications would have to be automatic, routine stuff. More importantly, when you have left, after so many years, the people that sent you off, they're long gone, they're dead. Mission managers are long gone, they're dead. They would have forgotten you a long time ago. And there's another postulate is the reason we don't travel is because as we progress, our technology progresses. So there's a theory that if we traveled, let's say, to outer space for 50 years, eventually something better that we built will catch up to us, pass us, and it'll tell us, turn around, buddy, we got something better. And the same thing will happen again. In a couple hundred years, something faster will come along, and too late, buddy, turn around. So we have to build better technology, and we have to limit our need, for expeditions, within the solar system. So here are some counter arguments that I hear a lot. Well, they are millions of years advanced as us. They travel within the speed of light. That's a possibility, but there's really no proof out there right now. I've heard this a lot. They've been here already. They haven't left. Now they're underground. They're at Dulce. I just got back from Puerto Rico, where I was told they're right there under the lake, etc. That's another possibility, and that's the physical proof I'm looking for, if that is a possibility. The little UFOs you see whizzing around are really drones or reconnaissance craft. The real mothership is cloaked somewhere behind the moon, etc. They use other modes of transportation, wormholes and stuff like that. They use artificial gravity, so there's no need for deterioration. They're going to walk out because they've been in gravity the whole time. And I like this one. I call this the who needs the spacecraft theory. They're interdimensional. They can get from here to here in 2 seconds. That's a possibility. I'd rather entertain. I can spend days talking about this than a tin can moving from A to Z, at the speed of light. But who knows? There's a lot of work and theories going on right now at NASA and Ceti about space travel. We know that if we spend too much time in space, the blood comes up to our lungs, comes up to our heads, our legs get skinny, our waist lines get skinny, and that's called the chicken legs, big head syndrome. And our eyes get big, our heads get big. Now we're kind of looking like the Greys. So that is a possibility. So if you spend too much, let's say about 100 years in space, this was done by NASA researchers. This is a normal human being in about 100 years. Their heads will get bigger, their eyes will get bigger. So contemplate on that when we talk about the Greys and other species. This is another cool pic I found from NASA, is that we are evolving. We know about evolution, and we're not the same as we were thousands of years ago, and we're not going to be the same in a couple thousand years either. So this anthropologist came up with this cool, I got to get his name. It got deleted for some reason. His theory is that this is what humans would look like at about the year 12,000, because it would be hotter, the sun would be bigger, we wouldn't need our hair, etc. Kind of looks like a gray, right? Almost big head. So who knows? You know, there's theories out there that some of these extraterrestrials, including the grays, are humans from the future. You know, and they're traveling back. That's a possibility itself when you look at this. Okay, so let's wrap that up. You know, they're really too humanoid. You know, I'd rather entertain that they're interdimensional, or they're possibly from the future, or they've just been here a long time, and they've also adapted to our gravity. They've evolved as well in the last million years. But they show no signs of space travel, really. And the grays possibly from the future. Okay, so I talked about the 4 extraterrestrials. Let's talk about their 4 alleged homes, which I call bad real estate. Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system. Binary means 2, so it's 2 stars. It's about 3 billion years old, 39 light years away. It's so close. I don't know, dozens of telescopes, deep space telescopes, have been looking at Zeta Reticuli for years now, really found no planetary systems. But here's the important part. Like I mentioned, beryllium. Zeta Reticuli has almost no beryllium, almost no stellar material. So it would be almost impossible for a planet to actually evolve around Zeta Reticuli. So there's really no planets there. So I don't know if they're coming from Zeta Reticuli. It's something we have not seen yet. Draconis is where the Reptilians come from. A little further away, 310 light years away. But it's a red giant. That means that it's at the end of his life cycle. It's already as big, like I told you it's going to be big. So even if it did have planets, those planets will be long gone by now, millions of years ago. But it too lacks beryllium. You know, we look at spectral analysis. We know what the sun is, what these stars are made of. And it's just very unlikely that any habitable planets will form around these stars. The Pleiades is from the Nordics. The problem with this here is that, A, they're very young. B-type stars, very young, and they die really quickly. They only last about 250 million years, as opposed to like our sun is billions of years old. So for any type of planet to have a habitable planet and evolve intelligent life, technological intelligent life capable of interstellar travel would probably be unlikely. But the problem with the Pleiades star clusters is that because the stars are so small and compressed, you know, we're spinning very slow, 24,000 miles per hour. These guys are spinning very fast. So, you know, everything will probably be ejected. Sirius was my best hope, and it still is a good hope, because it's very close. It's only 8.6 light years away. But it's a white dwarf. It's kind of already past the red giant phase, and there's no known planets. The point of all these 4 stars is that there's really no habitable planets, and they're already dying. But we can also argue that perhaps before they died, there was a habitable planet there, and maybe perhaps these guys left millions of years ago and found Earth. But at this point, there's nothing there, and some of the stars really can't host habitable planets. So we have to argue it backwards. Maybe they were there millions and millions of years ago, traveled here, have been here all along, they evolved, they became humanoid, etc. That is something we can argue. And there it is, possible migration. You know, speed of light is very, very slow. You know, everybody says they're traveling at the speed of light, but really, technically, it's really slow. Our first radio signal, I mentioned this earlier, was from Marconi, 1897. Really was the first signal to leave Earth into interstellar space. And it really hasn't traveled that much. So here is our galaxy. This little blue dot right here is equivalent to 125 light years. So after 125 years, you know, nobody's really heard us. So it's traveled about that far away. So have they heard us? Let's say there are alleged planets out there with intelligent life capable of receiving our signal, intelligent life capable of receiving our signal and understanding us. That's very difficult. And I think that's why Ceti is having difficulty right now. They just don't know what to look for. So that first signal by Marconi will take about 100,000 years for it to leave our galaxy. The problem with that is it's almost like throwing a rock in a pond. You get the first big wave, and as it goes out, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. It's the same thing with radio signal. After so many light years, we lose that radio propagation, and it really becomes background noise after so many light years. Signals are getting better and stronger, and about 20 light years is the furthest that one of our signals can go before it becomes indistinguishable from background radiation. And that's just actually if they're listening. So let's see if they heard us. Let's say, for instance, that there is no red dwarfs. They actually have planets around Zeta Reticuli, etc. And they're there listening to XM or something. Zeta Reticuli, 40 light years away. They should have received our signal. There may have been a response, total of 80 years. So we probably should have heard something by now. That's if they're actually listening and understood our signal and they responded. Draco, no, unfortunately no. It's 310 light years away, so about the year 2207, they'll finally maybe hear something in the background that's not background radiation. But for them to respond will be another 310 years, so it'll be a long time before we get a response from the reptilians. Pleiades is about 400 light years. They haven't received the signal either. About the year 2297, they'll hear something. 400 years later, we should get a response. I think we'll all be gone by then. Sirius is, like I say, is always the best possibility. They received it. It should be distinct. It should be very clear, reaching Sirius. But there's just been no response, unfortunately. Same thing with travel. Let's stick, when we talk about interstellar travel, let's stick to what we know. Let's not speculate on how fast they might be going. So let's look at the Voyager speed. It'll take 233,000 years for it to reach Zeta Reticuli. That's a long road trip. And that's a one-way trip. We're not talking about a round trip. Draco, it's going to take 190 million years for the Voyager to get there. That's a long way to go. 234 million years for it to reach the Pleiades star cluster, and about 152,000 years for it to reach Sirius. This is the closest binary star really close to us, and it's only 8.6 light years away. So even the fastest stuff we have in space right now, it's going to take a long time to get there. And that's, again, this is one-way trips. So looking at these things, even traveling at the speed of light, that's a 620-year round trip right there. That's an 800-year round trip right there. That's a lot of gas. That's a lot of food. That's a lot of fighting with your spouse, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're coming to the end. These are not challenges. These are recommendations from a scientist, from an investigator, of how we can all work together, you know, whether you're a believer or skeptic. There's too many arguments for ignorance. And what I mean by that is, I must have done about 2,000 investigations thus far, and I saw a light in the sky, I don't know what it was, it has to be extraterrestrial. That's it, they don't care. Or I saw a strange craft, it's not ours, because I didn't see USA, it's extraterrestrial. We gotta be careful with that. National UFO reporting numbers are flawed. I know this because I was with MUFON, I worked for NUFOR, et cetera. This summer alone, when I was working on the book, I looked at it took me 6 months, 10,000 MUFON reports. And I'm not saying it's intentionally inflated, but they're not triaged correctly. Of those 10,000 reports, I would say maybe 5 to 10 reports, 5 to 10% of those reports were legitimate UFO sightings. A lot of those reports in those databases are you know, single-hand witness, something that happened 50 years ago, I saw a light in the sky, anonymous, you know, you name it. Not really triage as my organization does to check these boxes for it to be an actual UFO investigation. So when you see, a lot of you probably get these monthly MUFON reports. There were 800 UFO reports last year. Oh my God, we're being inundated. That's not really the case. That's just numbers they're reporting. And I've talked to Jan Harsan. If you really triage those numbers, look at them carefully, do an investigation, there's maybe 50 to 100 UFO reports being submitted per month. So be careful with, every year there's 10,000 reports a year of UFOs. You gotta be careful with those numbers. They're not intentionally deceptive, it's like that, they're just reporting their number crunching. Let's clean up ufology. I love all these things, but now ufology is Bigfoot, it's Chupacabra, it's conspiracy theories, it's Antonio's the Men in Black. I get these emails every day, you name it. It's not true, guys. Let's stick to UFOs, let's stick to extraterrestrials, and that's it. And I think if we do that together, maybe the government, maybe the academia, maybe science will actually respect us and maybe even work with us, who knows. Be careful with titles. I see this a lot. He's a major general, he's ex-CIA, he saw something, so it must be true. A pilot, a police officer might be a trained observer, but you have to be careful with that. I know a lot of bad cops, I know a lot of bad military intelligence officers, I know a lot of bad astronauts. We've seen one not too recently who went to jail for murder or something like that, right? So credibility and reliability is very important during the investigative process, and I see that a lot. A police officer reported something, so we have to infer it happened, it has to be extraterrestrial, and we really don't do a background investigation on the witness, and we take it for granted that they're a police officer or a military officer, or they're, deathbed confessions. I was former CIA, you have to be careful with that. We can't cherry pick the evidence. I see this at a lot of conferences. We like to present stuff that really supports our hypothesis, but we reject all the stuff that doesn't. That's called cherry picking. That's not allowed in legitimate investigations in science. Work with skeptics. Skeptics are good. There's a bad, people don't like skeptics and they don't like debunkers, but really they're here to help you. Someone told me a while back, I think it was the last conference, skeptics are good because without skeptics, the garbage will pile up so high, soon the stink will be unbearable. So it's good to bring, scientists and skeptics on board. They're not there to debunk. There's a lot of good people I work with, and they want to find the truth just as much as you guys. Finally, there's a lot of good cases out there. Recent cases, let's stick to that. That's the stuff that really boils my bubble. People always tell me, what do you think about Roswell? What do you think about this? I'm like, that's the different generation. I'm not going to speculate on what the government did or did not do. There are just so many good recent cases right now for us to spend a lot of time on. So we talked about that, but we didn't talk about the stuff in blue because I can't talk about the entire book. So the rest of the book really talks about, if they do exist, what type of propulsion systems could they possibly use, for traveling at the speed of light. Time dilation. Time dilation is kind of cheating time travel. Who's heard of the twins paradox? If I travel fast enough at the speed of light, those who stay behind age more than I do, and I kind of stay a little younger. So I read about that in the book, that we can cheat time travel by using time dilation. Hunting for planets. I give a really good chapter on what is it I'm looking for when I'm studying extrasolar planets, tectonic activity, type of atmospheres, etc. How far away from the sun, things like that is the stuff we should all be looking at if we're into these extraterrestrial stuff. Interstellar communications. We know wormholes, but a lot of people don't know what white holes are, and that's a prevailing theory right now, that stuff that enters a black hole, right, it disappears, we never see it, whatever, once we pass the event horizon. There's a theory now that at the end of the black hole, the opposite end, there might be stuff coming out. So it's kind of like a wormhole. Could that be used for interstellar travel? You enter the black hole without destroying yourself, and you come out the other end, millions of light years at the end. Generational space travel. I launch, I go somewhere, and then it's my children's, et cetera, that eventually reach the destination. Or other methods. Extraterrestrials could be using frozen embryos. They freeze their embryos, they travel for millions of light years, and autonomously, when they reach their destination, they have robots, they start to grow, they become educated, et cetera. Even NASA's looking into that. Space hopping. Space hopping is using resources on your way to a destination, asteroid mining, getting energy from suns, et cetera. So rather than getting from A to Z, you get from A to B, B to C, C to D, and that also takes generations. That's a possibility too. Okay, we're wrapping up. So that's one of my books. Aerial Phenomena is a really good book. It's kind of the closest, I hate to use X-Files, but it's 50 investigations that I did, ranging from abductions, black triangles, men in black, and the investigative process I use. MUFON's, believe it or not, has been the biggest seller. So a lot of guys get this because it's really a condensed version of the big, MUFON has a great book, but this is like the condensed version. So if you want to learn investigations, what tools to buy, that's a great book. And then we just talked about half of space science. We've done a lot of TV shows. We just released this one, Skinwalker Ranch. We went out to Skinwalker a few months ago. I'll tell you what, I saw some stuff there. I don't know what it was, and we're going to have to go back. So here's a good example. There was 3 of us. We had about $20,000 worth of equipment, all the G-Wiz stuff. And the second we got there, every single battery was dead. And I checked before we left the hotel. A good Army Ranger checks everything before he leaves. And when we got there, which was only an hour drive from the hotel, everything was completely drained. So that was a good phenomenon. And we saw strange orbs, shadows passing by me. So that's a documentary. Area 51 is another documentary I did. So we went out there. Yeah, we got chased and all that stuff. So that was pretty cool. Anybody in Florida? This is we do 2 or 3 conferences a year. Very small, not as good and as big as this, but this is Apicon coming up in Tampa. So if anybody's interested, let me know. That's it. I'm done. Plenty of time. So we have time for questions. You want to throw tomatoes at me? I don't care. I'm good. I got thick skin. So I don't know how we do this. Do they line up or just raise hands?
Check 1, 2.
There we go. Okay. If you want to talk, just come up here to the. That way you don't have to scream. Wow, that's a lot of people. We have about a minute. I'm just kidding.
I know beryllium is a metal used in electronics. How does it apply to creation of worlds?
Study I've done is that the beryllium is what makes planets form. It's the metal. It's kind of like the glue that brings it together. I'm not a geophysicist, but my understanding is that the Kepler mission, for example, right now, they're finding extrasolar planets based on the wobbling of the planet and also the beryllium factor in those planets. So a good sun with beryllium kind of equates to that there is possibly an extrasolar planet. Low abundance of that material will probably be the opposite, that there's not. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Antonio.
Hey, what's up?
I'm curious if you have talked with anyone about the physics of entanglement.
No.
Because entanglement would give instant communication from one end of the universe to the other. And the second part is that going back 30 years ago, there were whistleblowers saying that one of the keys to the phenomena, whether they are self-activating machines here and the prime intelligence is 20 light years or more, that we're dealing with technology that knows how to deflect and control photons.
Yes.
That implies the ability to work with space-time and doing point-to-point closure, which also gets into the issue if there is that physics plus entanglement. We're talking about technology that Michio Kaku would say was a 3rd or 4th advanced civilization, and that in a 13.8 billion year long universe, there has been enough time in 3 or 4 epochs of 4 billion apiece for there to be advanced intelligence that would have had to have kept moving.
Yep.
And therefore, that issue of entanglement, being able to move point to point and being able to control photons down to a deflection. That's how that would be their camouflage, because they could change the photons coming into our retina and disappear.
I 100% agree with those hypotheses rather than the clunky tin can zipping through space. The first one, Entanglement, I had some interviews with some people. I don't know if that's the same as astral projection, but they're telling me that they've had the ability to communicate with, example, the Syrians, even though they're light years away, instantaneously. And that's kind of something I was looking into it, but the book can only be so big. And the second one, yeah, I totally agree with there's a lot of research going on the subatomic particles and physics and all that stuff. But that's like, I could write an entire book about that as well. But when we talk about the physics, the quantum physics and all that stuff, I'm more of a believer in their possibly using that type of method and technology than your interstellar travel, your regular interstellar travel.
And I was just trying to say that the complexity of where quantum physics and entanglement are pushing right now, which is really basically at the frontier from a human point of view, leaves us unable to comprehend that. And then one final thing, if what I've been exposed to is true, that we are dealing with intelligences that they don't have to be based here.
Yeah, exactly.
That they have sent drones, not just to this planet, but maybe 1 million planets over time. The androids, that most of the grays are not a prime intelligence. They have been made to work specifically on this planet. And if they are the ones responsible for manipulating DNA in a variety of life forms, then the fact that we are humanoid, we are the reflection perhaps of the prime intelligence or something that we have been made to function on this planet exactly as the androids. So you have to flip it around and raise that question.
There's a lot of possibilities that, theories that they had direct influence in our evolution. Sir?
Yes, Antonio, you've discussed some of the nearby stars relatively, of course, Sirius and Draco. What about Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani, that are G-type stars that are relatively close, similar to our sun, but a little fainter? Has NASA really checked those out with their
they've used Kepler.
search?
They've used Kepler, but they haven't seen anything.
They haven't seen anything?
Nope. And you can go. There's an actual. There's a website that has cataloged what you just mentioned too, all those star systems, and it'll tell you how long they looked for, what they used, how long they looked, and what was the result if there was any. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to look again. Technology changes, and even just as today, there's almost 2,000 extrasolar planets they found in just a year or two. So we're just learning now, these star systems and what's out there.
So at this time, they really haven't found any really Earth-like planets, certainly nearby, like I mentioned, those two stars.
There are some that they speculate might be Earth-like based on the spectral analysis of those stars and those planets. We know Earth leaves a certain signature, so they're looking for those signatures, but I really don't buy that, because Earth is unique, and other extraterrestrial civilizations out there might not look anything like us. So we're looking for planets that have water, land, oxygen, but the Zetas, the Reptilians, if they exist, they might come from totally different planetary systems that had nothing to do with so when people talk about the Earth hypothesis, the lone Earth hypothesis, I really don't buy that, because that's just what we look like and how we evolved. And for us to look for planets that are similar, that's kind of cheating the system, because we really don't know what they would look like, And if the Zetas exist or the Reptilians, they probably don't come from a planet that comes from ours. It's like what Linda said. They probably were here a long time ago, millions of years ago, and they've adapted to our atmosphere. They've adapted to our gravity, and they might have had an influence in our evolutionary process. That was a good question.
has started studying consciousness, would that for space travel, we wouldn't need bodies, we wouldn't need vehicles, we wouldn't need food?
That's similar to astral projection, and I was part of a study group in Baltimore. They have a group up there called the Experiencers, and the lady up there, I think her name is Elizabeth, she wholeheartedly believes that that's what she's done. She's actually mentally, metaphysically, and spiritually has traveled to other star systems and have interacted with extraterrestrials without leaving, her apartment. So I sit down with her, and she seems truthful. I don't think she's trying to pull a hoax or trying to make money. I have not physically investigated that because I'm into the nuts and bolts investigations. But there are plenty of people out there that I find very credible that are looking into that kind of stuff. So look up Baltimore Experiencers, and they do a lot of that astral projection stuff. And what was that name? Baltimore Experiencers. They have a website, they have a meetup group. It's pretty big. It's about 75 people now, so really cool group.
Okay, well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Antonio. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thanks.
And I was wondering if you know anything about the Nephilim or the RH factor blood, the RH negative factor blood.
No, ma'am. Can you tell me?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you can tell me later. I'm interested. Okay.
Yes, my name is Leon Freeman. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm really confused by what you were saying because I remember it was about 11 years ago, I saw a UFO. I didn't believe UFOs existed. I was getting ready to get into my truck, and this big ball of fire caught my attention. I thought an airplane had exploded, and it was coming toward where I was, and so I took out my cell phone to call 911 because I thought the whole neighborhood was going to explode. But the more I looked at it, the smoke was orange and green, and it was going just above the trees, and the trees were not swaying at all, and there was no sound. And it was not going toward the ground like it should have been going toward the ground. It was going in a straight line like it knew where it was going. In about 2 minutes, it disappeared in thin air.
Okay.
So I know I saw something.
Yeah, no, I never said UFOs don't exist. In fact, my first and last slide was the UFO phenomena is real. Trust me, I've sat down with witnesses, and credible witnesses. We're talking FBI agents, you name it, who've seen some strange stuff. But what I said was, my personal mission is not the belief spectrum. My goal is to find that physical proof that one day maybe I'll bring to the next conference and say, you're all right, you guys were all right, here it is. That's my goal. I'm not saying UFOs don't exist. What I did say was that the phenomena is inflated. There is UFO activity out there. A lot of it's strange. We can't explain it. But we shouldn't infer it's extraterrestrial just because it's zipped this way. That is strange. It's a possibility. It's not a human thing, but we can't speculate what it is, and we can't speculate what it isn't until we have the actual proof. But you saw a UFO. I totally believe you. I wish we can talk, but
on the 10 o'clock news right now, other people called and saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Because first I thought I didn't see it.
Listen, when I was in Utah investigating Skinwalker Ranch, I was just standing right there with my night vision, and everybody's telling me there's UFO portals there. And we saw light. It wasn't behind a mountaintop. It wasn't on the farm or whatever. It was hovering. It blew up for about 3 seconds and just said whoop. And I said, that was cool. What is it? I don't know. But that technically was a UFO, and to that day, I'm going to go back one day and figure it out. But okay, so thanks for everything. I'll be downstairs for the next 2 days. I love you guys. Bye.